Shot opens mid-chaos, flashing red lights. A shouting match and my 16-year-old son being shoved into a golf cart by two guys in fake uniforms. Viewer instantly wonders, wait, what? How do you even pull that off legally? And how does she not notice? I dropped the rake and sprinted toward the gate yelling, "Get your hands off my kid!" Halfway between disbelief and ready to swing rage, the taller guy, a balding 50-something with mirrored sunglasses and a gut that screamed weekend beer league, didn't even flinch. He was trespassing, he barked. Like that justified laying hands on a teenager. This is HOEA property, and we're authorized to detain for violations. Oh, were they? Now that's cute. Let me rewind a bit. I own 10 acres of beautiful wooded land, about 30 minutes outside the city. Bought it back when people still called it the sticks and couldn't spell master-planned community without Google. I moved out here for the peace. Raised chickens, fixed up a little red barn with my son. Grilled steaks on weekends, and generally stayed out of everyone's way. Then came the invasion 3 years ago. Green Ridge Estates sprang up on the other side of the tree line like a fungal outbreak, cookie-cutter homes, decorative street lamps, and an hose so bloated with power, you'd think they were running a shadow government. For the record, I never signed a thing. I'm not in the HOA. My land predates their suburb, their clubhouse, and their flimsy little bylaws. But that didn't stop Karen. Yes, the Karen. From acting like I was part of her dictatorship. Karen lives in the biggest house at the entrance of the new neighborhood. Drives a Range Rover with a custom plate that says, Queen, and wears tennis skirts. Like she's auditioning for Real Housewives of Nowhere. The day she rang my doorbell and handed me a compliance packet was the day this whole circus began. Apparently my tool shed was aesthetically non-compliant. My chickens, a noise violation, and my teenager unregistered. I laughed out loud, then politely informed her she had the wrong house, the wrong guy, and the wrong jurisdiction. She didn't take that well. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. From then on, it was passive-aggressive letters, anonymous code enforcement tips, and mysterious trash dumped near my fence. You know, classic Karen warfare. But this crossed every line. My son Jake was doing his usual morning routine, feeding the chickens and checking the fencing along our side yard, when these two vigilantes pulled up in a branded golf cart like they were on patrol in a dystopian subdivision. They saw a teenager in a hoodie near a property line and decided they were Judge Judy and executioner. What they didn't know, what made this whole thing extra special, is that Jake isn't just some random kid. He's the godson of the local police chief. He's also polite to a fault, knows the law better than most grown men, and has a tendency to record everything when something feels off. Oh yeah, he had his phone in his pocket. It was already recording as I stepped between the goons and my kid. The one with the sunglasses squared his shoulders. Sir, we're authorized to detain individuals violating community rules. Your son refused to give his name and attempted to flee. Jake, standing there with literal chicken feet on his boots, looked like he couldn't decide whether to laugh or start swinging. I told them this isn't HOEA property. He muttered, voice tight. They didn't care. I turned to the two men. You just manhandled a minor on camera on private land. That's kidnapping and impersonating an officer, at a minimum. The shorter guy, the nervous one, glanced at the golf cart like it might drive itself away. We're just following Karen's instructions. He mumbled. Of course you are. I walked them both off the property myself, resisting the urge to push one into the chicken coop. Jake followed, still visibly shaken but trying to play it cool. I'm good, he said, brushing dirt off his jeans, but I think they tried to take my phone. He handed it to me, screen still lit. Footage intact. Oh yes, we had everything. 2 hours later, Karen showed up like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, acting like she had a personal line to the Supreme Court. Your son was caught trespassing in a restricted zone, she said, not even bothering with a greeting. He's now banned from all Green Ridge communal areas, and we're assessing a fine of $250 for non-compliance. I stared at her, then at the patch of grass she was referring to. That's my chicken coop, I said slowly. On my land that you've now trespassed on, for the second time today. She blinked. Well, we've updated the HOA boundaries to include this area. You'll find it outlined in our spring newsletter. I actually laughed at that one. So you just annexed private property like it's Crimea. She sniffed. The board voted majority rules. What do you even say to that level of delusion? Karen then handed me what she claimed was an eviction notice from the HOA. It was printed in Comic Sans. I'm not kidding. I held it with 2 fingers like it was a used tissue. That's when her face changed. It went from smug to something tighter. Darker actions have consequences, she said. You'll see. I looked her dead in the eye. So does impersonating law enforcement and kidnapping a minor. You'll see too. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. After she left storming off in a cloud of cheap perfume and entitlement, I made a few calls. First to Jake's godfather, then to the FAA just for fun. You see, Karen had also been flying her drone over our property for the past week, claiming it was to monitor for code violations. She didn't realize you can't film over private property with audio without getting into serious federal trouble. And trust me, her drone had audio. Jake had the footage. What she thought was just suburban micromanagement was about to turn into an actual legal disaster. But that's not even the best part. Because the next day, when Karen tried to hold a hearing on my property, complete with folding chairs and HOA board members, something rolled up behind her. Not a golf cart, not a neighborhood watch. It was for squad cars, lights flashing, sirens chirping, and all of it on camera. Now tell me, what happens when a petty tyrant gets slapped with the reality of real authority? What happens when her so-called enforcers find themselves on the wrong end of the law? Let's just say Chapter 2 is going to be loud. When Karen came stomping up my driveway the next morning, I already knew she was going to escalate things. The woman had a gift for delusion. and absolutely no off switch when it came to doubling down on stupid. She was followed by two of her HOA lap dogs, dragging a folding table between them like they were about to host a bake sale. Behind them, a few more HOA board members fanned out, setting up lawn chairs along the edge of my property like they were preparing for a neighborhood tribunal. It would have been funny if it wasn't so absurd. One of them even brought a gavel, a real one. I counted at least 3 clipboards, a pitcher of lemonade, and one of those stupid Hoover-branded banners that read, "Community First." They were holding a hearing on my land. Karen marched up to the porch like she owned the place. "This is your final opportunity to cooperate," she announced loud enough for the trees to hear. "The board is prepared to make a decision about your continued presence in Green Ridge." I stayed seated, sipping coffee from my chipped mug, not even bothering to stand. "You're trespassing again," I said. "And this is the dumbest cosplay I've seen since Comic-Con came to the mall." Karen bristled her cheeks, going full tomato. "We are executing a lawful a disciplinary hearing. You and your son have repeatedly violated neighborhood standards, including trespassing, animal noise, drone interference, and firearm discharge." That last part made me raise an eyebrow. "Firearm discharge? You mean when I shot your illegal drone that was filming my minor son?" She ignored me, flipping through her clipboard like she was reading a court docket. "The board recommends the following: immediate removal of unauthorized livestock, payment of outstanding fines totaling $3,275, and submission of your residence to an emergency architectural review." Her voice was steady, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this in front of a mirror all night. I finished my coffee, stood up slowly, and whistled. Jake emerged from around the barn, calm and quiet, holding a manila folder. In it were the property records, the boundary surveys, and just for fun, the footage from his phone. Karen's face twitched when she saw him. The juvenile may not be present during disciplinary proceedings, she snapped. Jake handed me the folder without a word, but not before giving her a flat, unimpressed look that said everything. He was done playing nice. I took a slow breath. Let's make this real simple. This land is mine. It never has been, never will be part of your HOA. You have no jurisdiction here. You've trespassed, you've harassed a minor. You've impersonated law enforcement, and you've flown illegal surveillance equipment over private property. And now you've set up a mock court on my front lawn, like this is some low-budget episode of Judge Karen. Karen's nostrils flared. We'll see what the sheriff has to say. She sped, signaling to one of her cronies to call. The poor guy looked confused, but pulled out his phone anyway. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. That was the moment I've been waiting for. I didn't even have to say a word. Because just as Karen raised her gavel and banged it dramatically on the plastic folding table, the distinct wail of approaching sirens cut through the morning air. 3 patrol cars turned onto my drive, gravel crunching under their tires. The whole board members froze. Karen dropped the gavel. One of the men in the lawn chairs immediately stood up and began folding his seat like he was trying to disappear into it. Jake's godfather, the actual police chief, stepped out of the lead cruiser, adjusting his sunglasses and looking like he just walked off the set of a Western. He took one look at Karen's little kangaroo court and shook his head slowly, like a parent walking in on a kid, trying to microwave a spoon. Karen tried to regain control. "Officer, thank goodness we were just concluding our hearing. This man and his son have been harassing." She didn't get to finish. The chief raised a hand not to signal her to stop, but to signal his officers to start. "Detain the two men in the golf cart," he said. "We have video evidence of them unlawfully detaining a minor yesterday." One officer stepped forward, cuffs already out. Karen's eyes went wide. "Wait, what?" "No, that's not wait. You're making a mistake." "No, ma'am," the chief said, icily calm. "You made the mistake. Multiple, in fact. And you've done it on camera." The two men, Dave and his nervous buddy, were cuffed and read their rights right there next to the lemonade pitcher. Karen tried to physically block them, stepping between the officers and her husband. "You can't do this. He's hoist security." The chief looked unimpressed. "Hoist security is not law enforcement. They have no right to detain anyone, especially not a minor on land they don't own, wearing uniforms meant to imitate actual officers." He turned back to her. "You're lucky we're not arresting you too." "But he shot down my drone," Karen blurted, desperate now that her husband was being led away. "That's destruction of property." The chief arched an eyebrow. "Did you have authorization to fly over private land?" She faltered. "I was ensuring compliance." He motioned to one of the officers who walked up, holding a small metal case. Inside was what was left of the drone. This drone recorded video and audio of minors, without consent over private, non-HOA property. That's a violation of FAA regulations. "We've already contacted them. You'll be hearing from them directly." Karen's voice dropped to a whisper. But the board approved it. The silence that followed was heavier than a stack of HOA newsletters. The other board members started stepping back, slowly edging away from the scene, like extras in a disaster movie, who realized they were standing too close to the explosion. The chief turned to me and Jake. "You all right?" I nodded. Jake shrugged. "Better now." The chief looked back at Karen. "This ends today. You're done harassing this family. The next time I get a call involving you, it better be from your lawyer." As the police cruisers drove off, with Karen's fake enforcers in the back seat, the remaining board members melted away. Some muttered apologies. One offered to help carry the folding table back to his SUV. Karen stood frozen, staring at the banner she'd proudly hung minutes ago, now half collapsed and dragging in the dirt. Her kingdom was crumbling, and for once she didn't have a script. I watched her go quiet and fuming. Range Rover tires spitting gravel as she sped off, like a villain who just realized the sequel isn't about her. But I knew her too well. Karen wasn't going down without trying to take someone with her. And sure enough, as she reached the street, she paused, rolled down her window, and yelled one last thing. "This isn't over." And she was right. Because what she did next would make drones and golf carts look like child's play. I knew Karen wouldn't take the arrests lying down. People like her don't retreat. They regroup. They don't reflect, they retaliate. And judging by the look on her face, as her husband was driven off, in the back of a squad car, she was already calculating her next move. Honestly, I was almost impressed by how fast she shifted. From being publicly humiliated to planning her next power grab. The very next morning, while I was drinking my coffee in peace, for the first time in weeks, I noticed a car idling near the end of my driveway. It wasn't the usual Hogolf cart or Karen's Range Rover. It was a sleek, unmarked black sedan with tinted windows. The kind that either belongs to the IRS or someone trying really hard to look important. Out stepped a man in a suit who clearly thought he was starring in some legal drama. He walked up to the gate, scanned the property, like he expected cameras to pop out of the bushes, and called out with this smug tone that already rubbed me the wrong way. "Mr. Wallace, I represent Green Ridge Estates in a legal advisory capacity. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." I took another sip of my coffee and leaned on the porch railing. "So a lawyer for a fake government, huh? That must look great on a resume." He didn't smile. No sense of humor. Classic Ho attorney. "We'd like to resolve this civilly before further action is required," he said, pulling out a thick envelope and holding it up like it contained nuclear codes. "You are in violation of several community standards outlined in the amended charter of Green Ridge Estates." I didn't move. "I'm not in your HOA," I said. "Your charter means about as much to me as a grocery store flyer." He cleared his throat, clearly annoyed that his script wasn't working. "The whole board passed a boundary reclassification. Your property now falls within the expanded parameters." I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. The board voted and the vote was unanimous." He nodded, probably proud of that. I laughed louder than I needed to. People really think you can just draw new lines on a map and pretend it's law. That's not how any of this works. He pushed the envelope through the gate, letting it drop to the gravel. "You'll find a lien notice inside, as well as a list of fines. We expect full compliance within 10 business days." Then he turned and walked back to his mystery mobile, like he just delivered a death sentence. Jake came out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "More Ho theater?" he asked. "Yep," I said. "They're trying to pretend the Constitution doesn't apply here." Jake picked up the envelope with 2 fingers, like it was covered in something contagious. "Want me to light it on fire, or just feed it to the goats?" I grinned. Tempting, but no. We're going to play this by the book. Let them be the clowns. We'll be the ones building the circus tent around them. So I made another call. Not to the police this time. This one went to my cousin Maddie. She's not just a lawyer. She's the kind of lawyer that makes people sweat just by entering the room. She's handled federal land disputes, corporate takedowns, and once got a judge to apologize for wasting her time. Maddie was thrilled to help. Said she hadn't had this much fun since a chemical company tried to sue her for emotional damage after she crushed them in court. She showed up 2 days later with a briefcase, a whiteboard, and a caffeine-fueled vengeance I hadn't seen since college. We went over everything: property records, footage, drone violations, even the ridiculous paper trail the hoe left behind. Maddie's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Oh, this is good," she said. They violated privacy laws, trespassing laws, zoning codes, and depending on how they mailed that fake lien, possibly federal fraud statutes. Jake perked up. "So we get to sue them?" Maddie smiled. "Oh, honey, we're going to melt their little plastic throne." Meanwhile, Karen wasn't slowing down. Her next move was to rally the hoe into a mass campaign. They started a letter drop around the neighborhood, claiming I was a danger to the community, accusing me of threatening behavior, and implying that Jake was involved in delinquent activity. It was pure slander. One neighbor, a nice older guy named Tom, brought one of the letters over furious. "This is garbage," he said. "We all know you and Jake are the only sane ones in this circus." Turns out Karen had been trying to whip up a mob, hoping to get more people behind her, in case the legal stuff backfired. Unfortunately for her, most of the neighbors were just regular people who'd been silently suffering under her rule. Then came the cherry on top. Karen decided to call in the county zoning commission to do a compliance sweep. I watched from the porch as two guys in safety vests walked slowly down my driveway, obviously embarrassed to be there. I met them halfway. "Let me guess," I said. "Anonymous complaint." One of them nodded sheepishly. "We have to respond even if we know it's nonsense." They did a half-hearted look around, confirmed nothing was out of place, and left me with a printed notice that said, in big letters, "No violations found." I framed it, hung it right next to the front door. Then the FA called. Apparently someone, I wonder, who had tried to submit a complaint against me for interfering with civilian aerial equipment. The agent on the line sounded tired. "We already have the footage from your son." She said the drone was flying illegally, had unauthorized audio recording, and violated multiple restricted airspace regulations. She paused. "She's not going to like what we send her." A week later, Maddie filed a lawsuit against the hoe, and Karen personally. Charges included harassment, attempted extortion, unlawful surveillance, trespassing, impersonation of law enforcement, and defamation of character. Within days, hoe board members started dropping like flies. 2 of them issued public resignations, citing concerns about leadership. One even called me directly to apologize and offered to testify. The lawsuit hit the neighborhood like a bomb. Suddenly, Karen wasn't the queen anymore. She was radioactive. But she still had one last move. I came home late one night and saw flashing lights again. Only this time it wasn't the cops. It was a tow truck parked right outside my fence, and looked to it, my truck, my fully paid off, parked in my own driveway truck. I ran out shouting, demanding to know what was happening. The driver looked confused, said it was in whole order, said this vehicle violated overnight street parking rules. I stared at him. "It's not in the street. It's on my gravel, on my land." He scratched his head. "Lady said the new map includes this lot." Karen had literally tried to have my truck stolen. That was her last card, and that was her final mistake. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't even argue. I just walked back to the porch, grabbed my phone, and called Maddie. She picked up on the first ring, and I could practically hear her eyes narrow through the speaker. "Let me guess," she said, already annoyed. "Karen tried to repossess your truck." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. 2. Truck just hooked it up from my own driveway. Driver says he was told it was in whole order. There was a beat of silence, followed by a low chuckle that was honestly a little scary. "Okay," Maddie said, her voice colder than steel. "Time to go nuclear." And that's exactly what we did. The next morning, Maddie filed an emergency injunction against Karen and the HOA, citing unlawful interference with private property and attempted theft. It took less than 6 hours for a county judge to grant it. The order included an immediate cease and desist directive for Karen and the HOA, forbidding any contact, surveillance, or enforcement actions against me or Jake. But that was just the legal appetizer. The real storm was still brewing. Meanwhile, I went to the towing company's main office with the injunction in hand. The manager, a tired-looking guy with a coffee stain on his shirt, took one look at the paperwork and nearly turned inside out. "She said it was legit," he muttered, clearly regretting every moment of his involvement. "She even had some kind of ID badge. Said you were in a violation and the car was parked illegally." I asked him to describe the badge. His face twisted. Honestly, it looked homemade. Laminate pouch clip-on. Like a kid's school project. Of course it did. They returned my truck without argument, and I left with a written apology and a security cam screenshot of Karen standing there, arms crossed, as the driver loaded up my vehicle. I sent it to Maddie. She sent it to the county prosecutor. Then came the FA. A report turns out Karen had been flying not one, not two, but 3 drones over the past 6 months. 2 of them were equipped with audio recording, one with thermal imaging. She had flown over homes' backyards, and in one case recorded footage of a family barbecue that included children in swimsuits. That detail alone was enough to make the agents stop smiling. She violated half a dozen federal laws and more than a few moral ones. They fined her heavily, and that was just the start. There was a potential criminal charge being evaluated, pending further review of the footage she had collected and how it was stored. By now, the Green Ridge Ho was hemorrhaging board members. They were resigning in waves. The newsletters stopped showing up. The golf cart patrols vanished. People who used to glare at me in the grocery store now looked at me with a weird mixture of respect and fear, as if I had burned Karen in effigy in the town square. The best part, I didn't have to lift a finger. Karen had done it all herself. All I had to do was stand still and let her run, face first into the brick wall of consequences. But I wasn't finished. I decided it was time to give the neighborhood a parting gift. Something petty, sure, but also poetic. So I got to work on a project. I called in a buddy who does custom woodwork and commissioned a 12-foot-tall, hand-carved wooden rooster. It was glorious, wings flared, beak open mid-crow, carved from red cedar, so rich it almost glowed in the sunlight. We mounted it right on the edge of my property, facing Karen's yard and at the base. I added a bronze plaque that read, "In loving memory of Hoiterani. May she drone in peace." I unveiled it on a Saturday morning, the same time Karen used to hold her ridiculous community improvement briefings that nobody ever asked for. Jake set up lawn chairs. A few neighbors came by with coffee. Some even brought muffins. We all stood there and admired it, like it was a new war memorial. Karen, of course, stormed out of her house in a bathrobe, eyes wide, jaw slack. She marched across the street and read the plaque, like she couldn't believe it was real. Then she shouted, "This is harassment." I responded, "No. This is art. And it's protected under my First Amendment right. You know those little laws you've been trying to ignore?" She looked around like she was waiting for someone to back her up. No one did. One of her former board members gave her a small wave and said honestly, "It's a really nice rooster." That was the last time she tried anything publicly. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much privately. She still tried to claw back control. She filed a countersuit against me, citing emotional distress, neighborhood disharmony, and a bunch of other nonsense her new lawyer probably found in the legal equivalent of a fortune cookie. Maddie crushed it in 2 weeks. The judge dismissed it with prejudice and issued a warning about filing frivolous lawsuits. Karen now owed court costs, legal fees, and a hefty fine for wasting judicial resources. Word spread. The whole officially disbanded shortly after. The remaining board members voted to dissolve it entirely, citing irreparable reputational damage and legal liability. The clubhouse was sold, the golf carts were auctioned off, and the community first banner that used to hang proudly by the entrance of the neighborhood, it was removed. In its place, someone anonymously hung a new sign. "Welcome to Green Ridge. Now 100% Karen free." Karen put her house up for sale 2 weeks later. It sat on the market for months. Word had gotten out about her antics. Nobody wanted to deal with the fallout. She sold it at a loss to a couple from out of state who thought the rooster was hilarious and named it Cluck Norris. And me, I went back to my peaceful life, chicken sunsets, grilling steaks with Jake. No drones, no fake enforcers. Just silence and the occasional giggle from someone driving past. Cluck Norris. Every once in a while, someone from the old hoe would stop by to shake my hand or drop off a thank you card. Apparently, I'd become something of a local legend. The guy who stood up to Karen and won. Jake started jokingly calling me sheriff. I didn't mind. The best part wasn't the legal win or even the poetic revenge. It was the look on Karen's face when she realized she had finally lost not just power, not just control, but the ability to make people scared of her. That was the real victory. And just in case anyone ever forgets what happens when a petty tyrant tries to turn a peaceful ranch into her personal kingdom, Cluck Norris will be standing tall, crowing for justice.